This is a continuation of Passing by Nella Larsen, comprising Part 2, Section 2 through Part 2, Section 4. Part 2, Section 2. 5 days had gone by since Claire Kendry's appealing letter. Irene Redfield had not replied to it, nor had she had any other word from Claire. She had not carried out her first intention of writing at once, because on going back to the letter for Claire's address, she had come upon something which, in the rigor of her determination to maintain unbroken between them, the wall that Claire herself had raised, she had forgotten, or not fully noted. It was the fact that Claire had requested her to direct her answer to the post office's general delivery. That had angered Irene and increased her disdain and contempt for the other. Tearing the letter across, she had flung it into the scrap basket. It wasn't so much Claire's carefulness and her desire for secrecy in their relations — Irene understood the need for that — as that Claire should have doubted her discretion, implied that she might not be cautious in the wording of her reply and the choice of a posting box. Having always had complete confidence in her own good judgment and tact, Irene couldn't bear to have anyone seem to question them. Certainly not Claire Kendry. In another, calmer moment, she decided that it was, after all, better to answer nothing, to explain nothing, to refuse nothing, to dispose of the matter simply by not writing at all. Claire, of whom it couldn't be said that she was stupid, would not mistake the implication of that silence. She might, and Irene was sure that she would, choose to ignore it and write again. But that didn't matter. The whole thing would be very easy. The basket for all letters, silence for their answers. Most likely she and Claire would never meet again. Well, she, for one, could endure that. Since childhood, their lives had never really touched. Actually, they were strangers. Strangers in their ways and means of living. Strangers in their desires and ambitions. Strangers even in their racial consciousness. Between them, the barrier was just as high, just as broad, and just as firm as if in Claire did not run that strain of black blood. In truth, it was higher, broader, and firmer, because for her there were perils, not known or imagined by those others who had no such secrets to alarm or endanger them. The day was getting on toward evening. It was past the middle of October. There had been a week of cold rain, drenching the rotting leaves which had fallen from the poor trees that lined the street on which the Redfields' house was located, and sending a damp air of penetrating chill into the house, with a hint of cold days to come. In Irene's room, a low fire was burning. Outside, only a dull gray light was left of the day. Inside, lamps had already been lighted. From the floor above, there was the sound of young voices, sometimes Junior's serious and positive, again Ted's deceptively gracious one. Often there was laughter or the noise of commotion, tussling, or toys being slammed down. Junior, tall for his age, was almost incredibly like his father in feature and coloring, but his temperament was hers, practical and determined, rather than Brian's. Ted, speculative and withdrawn, was, apparently, less positive in his ideas and desires. About him there was a deceiving air of candor that was, Irene knew, like his father's show of reasonable acquiescence. If, for the time being, and with a charming appearance of artlessness, he submitted to the force of superior strength, or some other immovable condition or circumstance, it was because of his intense dislike of scenes and unpleasant argument. Brian over again. Gradually, Irene's thoughts slipped away from Junior and Ted to become wholly absorbed in their father. The old fear, with strength increased, the fear for the future, had again laid its hand on her, and try as she might, she could not shake it off. It was as if she had admitted to herself that against that easy surface of her husband's concordance with her wishes, which had, since the war had given him back to her physically unimpaired, covered an increasing inclination to tear himself and his possessions loose from their proper setting, she was helpless. The chagrin which she had felt at her first failure to subvert this latest manifestation of his discontent had receded, leaving in its wake an uneasy depression. Were all her efforts, all her labors, to make up to him that one loss, all her silent striving to prove to him that her way had been best, all her ministrations to him, all her outward sinking of self, to count for nothing in some unperceived sudden moment? And if so, what then would be the consequences to the boys, to her, to Brian himself? Endless searching had brought no answer to these questions. There was only an intense weariness from their shuttle-like procession in her brain. The noise and commotion from above grew increasingly louder. Irene was about to go to the stairway and request the boys to be quieter in their play when she heard the doorbell ringing. Now, who was that likely to be? She listened to Zulina's heels, faintly tapping on their way to the door, then to the shifting sound of her feet on the steps, then to her light knock on the bedroom door. "Yes, come in," Irene told her. Zulina stood in the doorway. She said, "Someone to see you, Mrs. Redfield." Her tone was discreetly regretful, as if to convey that she was reluctant to disturb her mistress at that hour, and for a stranger. "A Mrs. Bellew." "Claire." "Oh dear, tell her, Zulina," Irene began, "that I can't— No, I'll see her. Please bring her up here." She heard Zulina pass down the hall, down the stairs, then stood up, smoothing out the tumbled green and ivory draperies of her dress with light stroking pats. At the mirror, she dusted a little powder on her nose and brushed out her hair. She meant to tell Claire Kendry at once, and definitely, that it was of no use her coming, that she couldn't be responsible, that she talked it over with Brian, who had agreed with her that it was wiser for Claire's own sake to refrain. But that was as far as she got in her rehearsal. For Claire had come softly into the room without knocking, and before Irene could greet her, had dropped a kiss on her dark curls. Looking at the woman before her, Irene Redfield had a sudden, inexplicable onrush of affectionate feeling. Reaching out, she grasped Claire's two hands in her own and cried with something like awe in her voice, "Dear God, but aren't you lovely, Claire?" Claire tossed that aside, like the furs and small blue hat which she threw on the bed before seating herself slantwise in Irene's favorite chair, with one foot curled under her. "Didn't you mean to answer my letter, Renee?" she asked gravely. Irene looked away. She had that uncomfortable feeling that one has when one has not been wholly kind or wholly true. Claire went on. "Every day I went to that nasty little post office place. I'm sure they were all beginning to think that I'd been carrying on an illicit love affair and that the man had thrown me over. Every morning the same answer, 'Nothing for you.' I got into an awful fright, thinking that something might have happened to your letter, or to mine, and half the nights I would lie awake looking out at the watery stars, hopeless things, the stars, worrying and wondering. But at last it soaked in, that you hadn't written and didn't intend to. And then, well, as soon as ever I'd seen Jack off for Florida, I came straight here. And now, Renee, please tell me quite frankly why you didn't answer my letter." "Because you see—" Irena broke off and kept Claire waiting while she lit a cigarette, blew out the match and dropped it into a tray. She was trying to collect her arguments, for some sixth sense warned her that it was going to be harder than she thought to convince Claire Kendry of the folly of Harlem for her. Finally, she proceeded, "I can't help thinking that you ought not to come up here, ought not to run the risk of knowing Negroes." "You mean you don't want me, Renee?" Irene hadn't supposed that anyone could look so hurt. She said quite gently, "No, Claire, it's not that. But even you must see that it's terribly foolish, and not just the right thing." The tinkle of Claire's laugh rang out while she passed her hands over the bright sweep of her hair. "Oh, Renee," she cried, "you're priceless, and you haven't changed a bit. The right thing." Leaning forward, She looked curiously into Irene's disapproving brown eyes. You don't. You really can't mean exactly that. Nobody could. It's simply unbelievable. Irene was on her feet before she realized that she had risen. What I really mean, she retorted, is that it's dangerous and that you ought not to run such silly risks. No one ought to. You least of all. Her voice was brittle, for into her mind had come a thought, strange and irrelevant, a suspicion that had surprised and shocked her and driven her to her feet. It was that, in spite of her determined selfishness, the woman before her was yet capable of heights and depths of feeling that she, Irene Redfield, had never known. Indeed, never cared to know. The thought, the suspicion, was gone as quickly as it had come. Claire said, "Oh, me!" Irene touched her arm caressingly, as if in contrition for that flashing thought. "Yes, Claire, you. It's not safe. Not safe at all." Safe! It seemed to Irene that Claire had snapped her teeth down on the word and then flung it from her. And for another flying second, she had that suspicion of Claire's ability for a quality of feeling that was to her strange and even repugnant. She was aware, too, of a dim premonition of some impending disaster. It was as if Claire Kendry had said to her, for whom safety, security were all important, "Safe! Damn being safe!" and meant it. With a gesture of impatience, she sat down. In a voice of cool formality, she said, "Brian and I have talked the whole thing over carefully and decided that it isn't wise. He says it's always a dangerous business, this coming back. He's seen more than one come to grief because of it. And Claire, considering everything, Mr. Bellew's attitude and all that, don't you think you ought to be as careful as you can?" Claire's deep voice broke the small silence that had followed Irene's speech. She said, speaking almost plaintively, "I ought to have known. It's Jack. I don't blame you for being angry, though I must say you behaved beautifully that day. But I did think you'd understand Renee. It was that, partly, that has made me want to see other people. It just swooped down and changed everything. If it hadn't been for that, I'd have gone on to the end, never seeing any of you. But that did something to me, and I've been so lonely since. You can't know. Not close to a single soul. Never anyone to really talk to." Irene pressed out her cigarette. While doing so, she saw again the vision of Claire Kendry staring disdainfully down at the face of her father, and thought that it would be like that she would look at her husband if he lay dead before her. Her own resentment was swept aside, and her voice held an accent of pity as she exclaimed, "Why, Claire! I didn't know. Forgive me. I feel like 7 beasts. It was stupid of me not to realize. Number? Not at all. You couldn't. Nobody, none of you could," Claire moaned. The black eyes filled with tears that ran down her cheeks and spilled into her lap, ruining the priceless velvet of her dress. Her long hands were a little uplifted and clasped tightly together. Her effort to speak moderately was obvious, but not successful. "How could you know? How could you? You're free. You're happy. And," with faint derision, "safe." Irene passed over that touch of derision, for the poignant rebellion of the other's words had brought the tears to her own eyes, though she didn't allow them to fall. The truth was that she knew weeping did not become her. Few women, she imagined, wept as attractively as Claire. "I'm beginning to believe," she murmured, "that no one is ever completely happy, or free, or safe." Well then, what does it matter? One risk more or less. If we're not safe anyway, if even you're not, it can't make all the difference in the world. It can't to me. Besides, I'm used to risks, and this isn't such a big one as you're trying to make it. "Oh, but it is, and it can make all the difference in the world. There's your little girl, Claire. Think of the consequences to her." Claire's face took on a startled look, as though she were totally unprepared for this new weapon with which Irene had assailed her. Seconds passed, during which she sat with stricken eyes and compressed lips. "I think," she said at last, "that being a mother is the cruelest thing in the world." Her clasped hands swayed forward and back again, and her scarlet mouth trembled irrepressibly. "Yes," Irene softly agreed. For a moment she was unable to say more. So accurately had Claire put into words that which, not so definitely defined, was so often in her own heart of late. At the same time she was conscious that here, to her hand, was a reason which could not be lightly brushed aside. "Yes," she repeated, "and the most responsible, Claire. We mothers are all responsible for the security and happiness of our children. Think what it would mean to your Marjorie if Mr. Bellew should find out. You'd probably lose her, and even if you didn't, nothing that concerned her would ever be the same again. He'd never forget that she had Negro blood, and if she should learn, well, I believe that after 12 it is too late to learn a thing like that. She'd never forgive you. You may be used to risks, but this is one you mustn't take, Claire. It's a selfish whim, an unnecessary and—" "Yes, Zulena. What is it?" she inquired, a trifle tartly, of the servant who had silently materialized in the doorway. "The telephone's for you, Mrs. Redfield. It's Mr. Wentworth." "All right, thank you. I'll take it here." And with a muttered apology to Claire, she took up the instrument. "Hello. Yes, Hugh. Oh, quite. And you? I'm sorry, every single thing's gone. Oh, too bad. Yes, I suppose you could. Not very pleasant, though. Yes, of course. In a pinch, everything goes. Wait, I've got it. I'll change mine with whoever's next to you, and you can have that. No, I mean it. I'll be so busy I shan't know whether I'm sitting or standing. As long as Brian has a place to drop down now and then. Not a single soul. No, don't. That's nice. My love to Bianca. I'll see to it right away and call you back. Goodbye." She hung up and turned back to Claire, a little frown on her softly chiseled features. "It's the NWL dance," she explained. "The Negro Welfare League, you know. I'm on the ticket committee. Or, rather, I am the committee. Thank heaven it comes off tomorrow night and doesn't happen again for a year. I'm about crazy, and now I've got to persuade somebody to change boxes with me." "That wasn't," Claire asked, "Hugh Wentworth? Not the Hugh Wentworth?" Irene inclined her head. On her face was a tiny, triumphant smile. "Yes, the Hugh. Wentworth. Do you know him?" "Number, how should I? But I do know about him. And I've read a book or two of his. Awfully good, aren't they?" I suppose so. Sort of contemptuous, I thought. As if he more or less despised everything and everybody. I shouldn't be a bit surprised if he did. Still, he's about earned the right to. Lived on the edges of nowhere in at least 3 continents. Been through every danger in all kinds of savage places. It's no wonder he thinks the rest of us are a lazy, self-pampering lot. Hugh's a dear, though. Generous as one of the 12 disciples. Give you the shirt off his back. Bianca, that's his wife, is nice too. "And he's coming up here to your dance?" Irene asked why not. It seems rather curious. A man like that, going to a Negro dance. This, Irene told her, was the year 1927 in the city of New York, and hundreds of white people of Hugh Wentworth's type came to affairs in Harlem, more all the time. So many that Brian had said, "Pretty soon the colored people won't be allowed in at all, or will have to sit in Jim Crow's sections." "What do they come for?" "Same reason you're here, to see Negroes." "But why?" "Various motives," Irene explained. "A few purely and frankly to enjoy themselves. Others to get material to turn into shekels. More, to gaze on these great and near great, while they gaze on the Negroes." Claire clapped her hand. "Renee, suppose I come too. It sounds terribly interesting and amusing, and I don't see why I shouldn't." Irene, who was regarding her through narrowed eyelids, had the same thought that she had had 2 years ago on the roof of the Drayton, that Claire Kendry was just a shade too good looking. Her tone was on the edge of irony as she said, "You mean because so many other white people go?" A pale rose color came into Claire's ivory cheeks. She lifted a hand in protest. "Don't be silly, certainly not. I mean that in a crowd of that kind I shouldn't be noticed." On the contrary, was Irene's opinion. It might be even doubly dangerous. Some friend or acquaintance of John Bellew or herself might see and recognize her. At that, Claire laughed for a long time, little musical trills following one another in sequence after sequence. It was as if the thought of any friend of John Bellew's going to a Negro dance was to her the most amusing thing in the world. "I don't think," she said, when she had done laughing, "we need worry about that." Irene, however, wasn't so sure. But all her efforts to dissuade Claire were useless. To her, "You never can tell whom you're likely to meet there," Claire's rejoinder was, "I'll take my chance on getting by. Besides, you won't know a soul, and I shall be too busy to look after you. You'll be bored stiff." I won't. If nobody asks me to dance, not even Dr. Redfield, I'll just sit and gaze on the great and the near great, too. Dear Renee, be polite and invite me." Irene turned away from the caress of Claire's smile, saying promptly and positively, "I will not." "I mean to go anyway," Claire retorted, and her voice was no less positive than Irene's. "Oh, no, you couldn't possibly go there alone. It's a public thing. All sorts of people go. Anybody who can pay $1, even ladies of easy virtue looking for trade. If you were to go there alone, you might be mistaken for one of them, and that wouldn't be too pleasant." Claire laughed again. "Thanks. I never have been. It might be amusing. I'm warning you, Renee, that if you're not going to be nice and take me, I'll still be among those present. I suppose my $1's as good as anyone's." "Oh, the $1! Don't be a fool, Claire. I don't care where you go or what you do. All I'm concerned with is the unpleasantness and possible danger which your going might incur because of your situation. To put it frankly, I shouldn't like to be mixed up in any row of the kind." She had risen again as she spoke, and was standing at the window lifting and spreading the small yellow chrysanthemums in the gray stone jar on the sill. Her hands shook slightly, for she was in a near rage of impatience and exasperation. Claire's face looked strange, as if she wanted to cry again. One of her satin-covered feet swung restlessly back and forth. She said vehemently, violently almost, "Damn, Jack! He keeps me out of everything. Everything I want. I could kill him. I expect I shall some day." "I wouldn't," Irene advised her. "You see, there's still capital punishment in this state at least. And really, Claire, after everything's said, I can't see that you've a right to put all the blame on him. You've got to admit that there's his side to the thing. You didn't tell him you were colored, so he's got no way of knowing about this hankering of yours after Negroes, or that it galls you to fury to hear them called niggers and black devils. As far as I can see, you'll just have to endure some things and give up others. As we've said before, everything must be paid for. Please be reasonable." But Claire, it was plain, had shut away reason as well as caution. She shook her head. I can't, she said. "I would if I could, but I can't. You don't know. You can't realize how I want to see Negroes, to be with them again, to talk with them, to hear them laugh." And in the look she gave Irene, there was something groping and hopeless, and yet so absolutely determined that it was like an image of the futile searching and the firm resolution in Irene's own soul, and increased the feeling of doubt and compunction that had been growing within her about Claire Kendry. She gave in. "Oh, come if you want to. I suppose you're right. Once can't do such a terrible lot of harm." Pushing aside Claire's extravagant thanks, for immediately she was sorry that she had consented. She said briskly, "Should you like to come up and see my boys?" "I'd love to." They went up, Irene thinking that Brian would consider that she'd behaved like a spineless fool, and he would be right. She certainly had. Claire was smiling. She stood in the doorway of the boys' playroom, her shadowy eyes looking down on Junior and Ted, who had sprung apart from their tussling. Junior's face had a funny little look of resentment. Ted's was blank. Claire said, "Please don't be cross. Of course, I know I've gone and spoiled everything, but maybe, if I promise not to get too much in the way, you'll let me come in, just the same." "Sure, come in if you want to," Ted told her. "We can't stop you, you know." He smiled and made her a little bow, and then turned away to a shelf that held his favorite books. Taking one down, he settled himself in a chair and began to read. Junior said nothing, did nothing, merely stood there waiting. "Get up, Ted. That's rude. This is Theodore, Mrs. Bellew. Please excuse his bad manners. He does know better. And this is Brian Jr. Mrs. Bellew is an old friend of Mother's. We used to play together when we were little girls." Claire had gone, and Brian had telephoned that he'd been detained and would have his dinner downtown. Irene was a little glad for that. She was going out later herself, and that meant she wouldn't probably see Brian until morning, and so could put off for a few more hours, speaking of Claire and the NWL dance. She was angry with herself and with Claire, but more with herself, for having permitted Claire to tease her into doing something that Brian had, all but expressly, asked her not to do. She didn't want him ruffled, not just then, not while he was possessed of that unreasonable, restless feeling. She was annoyed, too, because she was aware that she had consented to something which, if it went beyond the dance, would involve her in numerous petty inconveniences and evasions. And not only at home with Brian, but outside with friends and acquaintances. The disagreeable possibilities in connection with Claire Kendry's coming among them loomed before her in endless irritating array. Claire, it seemed, still retained her ability to secure the thing that she wanted in the face of any opposition, and in utter disregard of the convenience and desire of others. About her, there was some quality, hard and persistent, with the strength and endurance of rock, that would not be beaten or ignored. She couldn't, Irene thought, have had an entirely serene life. Not with that dark secret forever crouching in the background of her consciousness, and yet she hadn't the air of a woman whose life had been touched by uncertainty or suffering. Pain, fear, and grief were things that left their mark on people. Even love, that exquisite torturing emotion, left its subtle traces on the countenance. But Claire, she had remained almost what she had always been, an attractive, somewhat lonely child, selfish, willful, and disturbing. Part 2, Section 3. The things which Irene Redfield remembered afterward about the Negro Welfare League dance seemed to her unimportant and unrelated. She remembered the not quite derisive smile with which Brian had cloaked his vexation when she informed him, oh, so apologetically, that she had promised to take Claire, and related the conversation of her visit. She remembered her own little choked exclamation of admiration when, on coming downstairs a few minutes later than she had intended, she had rushed into the living room where Brian was waiting and had found Claire there too. Claire, exquisite, golden, fragrant, flaunting, in a stately gown of shining black taffeta, whose long, full skirt lay in graceful folds about her slim golden feet. Her glistening hair drawn smoothly back into a small twist at the nape of her neck. Her eyes sparkling like dark jewels. Irene, with her new rose-colored chiffon frock ending at the knees, and her cropped curls, felt dowdy and commonplace. She regretted that she hadn't counseled Claire to wear something ordinary and inconspicuous. What on earth would Brian think of deliberate courting of attention? But if Claire Kendry's appearance had in it anything that was, to Brian Redfield annoying or displeasing, the fact was not discernible to his wife as, with an uneasy feeling of guilt, she stood there looking into his face while Claire explained that she and he had made their own introductions, accompanying her words with a little deferential smile for Brian, and receiving in return one of his amused, slightly mocking smiles. She remembered Claire saying, as they sped northward, "You know, I feel exactly as I used to on the Sunday we went to the Christmas tree celebration. I knew there was to be a surprise for me and couldn't quite guess what it was to be. I am so excited. You can't possibly imagine. It's marvelous to be really on the way. I can hardly believe it." At her words and tone, a chilly wave of scorn had crept through Irene. "All those superlatives," she said, taking care to speak indifferently. "Well, maybe in some ways you will be surprised, more, probably, than you anticipate." Brian at the wheel had thrown back, and then again, she won't be so very surprised after all, for it'll no doubt be about what she expects, like the Christmas tree. She remembered rushing around here and there, consulting with this person and that one, and now and then snatching a part of a dance with some man whose dancing she particularly liked. She remembered catching glimpses of Claire in the whirling crowd, dancing, sometimes with a white man, more often with a Negro, frequently with Brian. Irene was glad that he was being nice to Claire, and glad that Claire was having the opportunity to discover that some colored men were superior to some white men. She remembered a conversation she had with Hugh Wentworth in a free half-hour when she had dropped into a chair in an emptied box and let her gaze wander over the bright crowd below. Young men, old men, white men, black men, youthful women, older women, pink women, golden women, fat men, thin men, tall men, short men, stout women, slim women, stately women, small women moved by. An old nursery rhyme popped into her head. She turned to Wentworth, who had just taken a seat beside her, and recited it. Rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. "Yes," Wentworth said, "that's it. Everybody seems to be here, and a few more. But what I'm trying to find out is the name, status, and race of the blonde beauty out of the fairy tale. She's dancing with Ralph Hazelton at the moment. Nice study in contrast, that." It was. Claire fair and golden, like a sunlit day. Hazelton dark with gleaming eyes, like a moonlit night. "She's a girl I used to know a long time ago in Chicago, and she wanted especially to meet you. It's awfully good of her, I'm sure. And now, alas, the usual things happened. All these others, these, gentlemen of color, have driven a mere Nordic from her mind." "Stuff?" "It's a fact. And what happens to all the ladies of my superior race who are lured up here? Look at Bianca. Have I laid eyes on her tonight except in spots, here and there, being twirled about by some Ethiopian? I have not." "But Hugh, you've got to admit that the average colored man is a better dancer than the average white man. That is, if the celebrities and butter and egg men who find their way up here are fair specimens of white terpsichorean art. Not having tripped the light fantastic with any of the males, I'm not in a position to argue the point, but I don't think it's merely that, or something else, some other attraction. They're always raving about the good looks of some Negro, preferably an unusually dark one. Take Hazelton there, for example. Dozens of women have declared him to be fascinatingly handsome. How about you, Irene? Do you think he's, ravishingly beautiful?" "I do not, and I don't think the others do either. Not honestly, I mean. I think that what they feel is, well, a kind of emotional excitement. You know, the sort of thing you feel in the presence of something strange, and even, perhaps, a bit repugnant to you. Something so different that it's really at the opposite end of the pole from all your accustomed notions of beauty." "Damned if I don't think you're halfway right." "I'm sure I am, completely." Except, of course, when it's just patronizing kindness on their part. And I know colored girls who've experienced the same thing, the other way round, naturally. And the men? You don't subscribe to the general opinion about their reason for coming up here, purely predatory. Or do you? Number more curious, I should say. Wentworth, whose eyes were a clouded amber color, had given her a long, searching look that was really a stare. He said, "All this is awfully interesting, Irene. We've got to have a long talk about it sometime soon. There's your friend from Chicago. First time up here and all that. A case in point." Irene's smile had only just lifted the corners of her painted lips. A match blazed in. Wentworth's broad hands as he lighted her cigarette and his own, and flickered out before he asked, "Or isn't she?" Her smile changed to a laugh. "Oh, Hugh, you're so clever. You usually know everything. Even how to tell the sheep from the goats. What do you think? Is she—" He blew a long, contemplative wreath of smoke. "Damned if I know. I'll be as sure as anything that I've learned the trick. And then in the next minute I'll find I couldn't pick some of 'em if my life depended on it." "Well, don't let that worry you. Nobody can. Not by looking." "Not by looking, eh? Meaning?" "I'm afraid I can't explain. Not clearly. There are ways, but they're not definite or tangible." "Feeling of kinship or something like that?" "Good heavens, no. Nobody has that except for their in-laws." "Right again! But go on about the sheep and the goats." "Well, take my own experience with Dorothy Tompkins. I'd met her 4 or 5 times, in groups and crowds of people, before I knew she wasn't a Negro. One day I went to an awful tea, terribly dicty. Dorothy was there. We got talking. In less than 5 minutes I knew she was Fay. Not from anything she did, or said, or anything in her appearance. Just something. A thing that couldn't be registered." "Yes, I understand what you mean, yet lots of people pass all the time." "Not on our side, Hugh. It's easy for a Negro to pass for white, but I don't think. It would be so simple for a white person to pass for colored." "Never thought of that." "No, you wouldn't. Why should you?" He regarded her critically through mists of smoke. "Slippin' me, Irene?" She said soberly, "Not you, Hugh. I'm too fond of you, and you're too sincere." And she remembered that towards the end of the dance, Brian had come to her and said, "I'll drop you first and then run Claire down," and that he had been doubtful of her discretion when she had explained to him that he wouldn't have to bother because she had asked Bianca Wentworth to take her down with them. Did she, he had asked, think it had been wise to tell them about Claire? "I told them nothing," she said sharply, for she was unbearably tired, "except that she was at the Walsingham. It's on their way, and really, I haven't thought anything about the wisdom of it. But now that I do, I'd say it's much better for them to take her than you." "As you please." "She's your friend, you know," he had answered, with a disclaiming shrug of his shoulders. Except for these few unconnected things, the dance faded to a blurred memory, its outlines mingling with those of other dances of its kind that she had attended in the past and would attend in the future. Part 2, Section 4. But undistinctive as the dance had seemed, it was, nevertheless, important, for it marked the beginning of a new factor in Irene Redfield's life, something that left its trace on all the future years of her existence. It was the beginning of a new friendship with Claire Kendry. She came to them frequently after that, always with a touching gladness that welled up and overflowed on all the Redfield household. Yet Irene could never be sure whether her comings were a joy or a vexation. Certainly she was no trouble. She had not to be entertained, or even noticed, if anyone could ever avoid noticing Claire. If Irene happened to be out or occupied, Claire could very happily amuse herself with Ted and Junior, who had conceived for her an admiration that verged on adoration, especially Ted. Or, lacking the boys, she would descend to the kitchen and, with, to Irene, an exasperating childlike lack of perception, spend her visit in talk and merriment with Zulena and Sadie. Irene, while secretly resenting these visits to the playroom and kitchen, for some obscure reason which she shied away from putting into words, never requested that Claire make an end of them, or hinted that she wouldn't have spoiled her own Marjorie so outrageously, nor been so friendly with white servants. Brian looked on these things with the same tolerant amusement that marked his entire attitude toward Claire. Never since his faintly derisive surprise at Irene's information that she was to go with them the night of the dance had he shown any disapproval of Claire's presence. On the other hand, it couldn't be said that her presence seemed to please him. It didn't annoy or disturb him, so far as Irene could judge. That was all. Didn't he, she once asked him, think Claire was extraordinarily beautiful? No, he had answered. That is, not particularly. Brian, you're fooling. No, honestly. Maybe I'm fussy. I suppose she'd be an unusually good-looking white woman. I like my ladies darker. Beside an A No. 1 Sheba, she simply hasn't got 'em. Claire went, sometimes with Irene and Brian, to parties and dances, and on a few occasions when Irene hadn't been able or inclined to go out, she had gone alone with Brian to some bridge party or benefit dance. Once in a while, she came formally to dine with them. She wasn't, however, in spite of her poise and air of worldliness, the ideal dinner party guest. Beyond the aesthetic pleasure one got from watching her, she contributed little, sitting for the most part silent, an odd dreaming look in her hypnotic eyes, though she could for some purpose of her own, the desire to be included in some party being made up to go cabareting, or an invitation to a dance, or a tea talk fluently and entertainingly. She was generally liked. She was so friendly and responsive, and so ready to press the sweet food of flattery on all. Nor did she object to appearing a bit pathetic and ill-used so that people could feel sorry for her. And no matter how often she came among them, she still remained someone apart, a little mysterious and strange, someone to wonder about and to admire and to pity. Her visits were undecided and uncertain, being, as they were, dependent on the presence or absence of John Bellew in the city. But she did, once in a while, manage to steal uptown for an afternoon even when he was not away. As time went on without any apparent danger of discovery, even Irene ceased to be perturbed about the possibility of Claire's husband stumbling on her racial identity. The daughter, Marjorie, had been left in Switzerland in school, for Claire and Bellew would be going back in the early spring. In March, Claire thought, and how I do hate to think of it, she would say, always with the suggestion of least rebellion. But I can't see how I'm going to get out of it. Jack won't hear of my staying behind. If I could have just a couple of months more in New York, alone I mean, I'd be the happiest thing in the world. I imagine you'll be happy enough once you get away, Irene told her one day when she was bewailing her approaching departure. Remember, there's Marjorie. Think how glad you'll be to see her after all this time. Children aren't everything, was Claire Kendry's answer to that. There are other things in the world, though I admit some people don't seem to suspect it. And she laughed, more, it seemed, at some secret joke of her own than at her words. Irene replied, You know you don't mean that, Claire. You're only trying to tease me. I know very well that I take being a mother rather seriously. I am wrapped up in my boys and the running of my house. I can't help it. And really, I don't think it's anything to laugh at. And though she was aware of the slight primness in her words and attitude, she had neither power nor wish to efface it. Claire, suddenly very sober and sweet, said, You're right. It's no laughing matter. It's shameful of me to tease you, Renee. You are so good. And she reached out and gave Irene's hand an affectionate little squeeze. Don't think, she added, whatever happens, that I'll ever forget how good you've been to me. Nonsense. Oh, but you have. It's just that I haven't any proper morals or sense of duty, as you have, that makes me act as I do. Now you are talking nonsense. But it's true, Renee. Can't you realize that I'm not like you a bit? Why, to get the things I want badly enough, I'd do anything, hurt anybody, throw anything away. Really, Renee, I'm not safe. Her voice, as well as the look on her face, had a beseeching earnestness that made Irene vaguely uncomfortable. She said, I don't believe it. In the first place, what you're saying is so utterly, so wickedly wrong. And as for your giving up things, she stopped, at a loss for an acceptable term, to express her opinion of Claire's having nature. But Claire Kendry had begun to cry, audibly, with no effort at restraint, and for no reason that Irene could discover. This concludes the fourth part of 6 total of Passing by Nella Larsen, produced by Best Audiobooks for Free.